Hello, welcome to this video where I'm going to show you how I made this little diorama that I'm calling the Guardians of the Enchanted Fountain. I started out with these little ceramic houses. They're already pretty cute. I found them at Poundland, but they are quite sloppily painted, but the molds are very good and interesting. So I had the idea of using this disc thing that used to hold pins, and I had an empty one, and I thought it made like a really good base for a little fountain. And here I am just figuring out the position of the objects on my base. I'm using just some scrap cardboard from some food packaging, and I'm just cutting off the bits that I don't need. As a first pass, I'm going to paint everything this dark brown. It's kind of like a nice creamy acrylic paint, and it's really good for a base. I'm just covering everything thoroughly and letting it dry for a few hours, making sure that when I paint layers on it, it won't chip. And to base these little plastic pieces, I file them first with a nail file because the plastic is shiny and a little bit of sanding makes it hold the paint better. I'm also going to use this tiny little dollhouse dish and a resin rose to make the fountain. I'm also painting some beads with the same dark brown. These are going to be used as planters later in the projects, and I'm also like filing off seams and some rough edges as I go. I'm cutting just some paper strips for the edge of that cardboard base, and I am using my large hot glue gun to secure these paper strips all around and basically seal the base. And as you can see, I'm using more hot glue to join the seams better and to prepare a more friendly surface. I'm using a mixture of tile grout, some glue and water to make a paste, because two of the little houses have kind of like a smooth finish on the walls, and I want to add some texture, just like a real house would have in real life. And I'm just applying a thick layer of this paste with a stick to both of the houses that have smooth walls. And I'm using my finger to tap and make a sort of interesting texture. I'm also using the leftover mixture of tile grout to make the transition from the edge of the base to the middle a little bit more subtle. And also it's just really good basing material. And I had these little wooden discs, and I cut them in half, and I'm going to use them to make a partial fence around the perimeter. But first I'm painting them a dark brown as well, just as a base color. And I'm also painting the base. The color helps because I suppose the ground tends to be brownish, but really is about giving it that first paint coat that makes it receptive to all the other paints that are going to follow. And here are my little houses after that tile grout mixture has dried, and I am giving them a coat of acrylic paint on the walls. And I made a dark brown wash that I'm going to use on one of them but leave the other without. I just really like how washes tend to bring out the details on things with texture. And for the third little house that actually had a really great molding, as if the house itself was built out of logs, I am going to try and make a nice wood texture by applying a few coats of orangish yellow first. Of course, I'm going to paint the roofs, the leaf ones, in this kind of yellowish green first. I did paint them the same color. I knew there were going to be a lot of different greens in this little environment, and I thought it would be more cohesive if I didn't use very different greens on the roofs. And I'm painting the stonework on some of the houses with black first, and then dry brushing with a little bit of brownish gray after that coat of black has dried. I'm using the same brownish gray to dry brush the base of the fountain, and painting black the little bowl as well. I made a kind of like a really watered down dark green paint with a little bit of brown and black in it to kind of use as an overpaint over the roof leaves, just so that dark color would go into those veins. Unfortunately, I didn't film these steps, but I painted the flower roof, and I painted all the details of the windows and doors, and added a little bit of shiny gold paint to everything. And I also assembled the little fountain. Now I'm going to be attaching the little fence pieces to the base, and I am going to make sure that it's symmetrical to some degree, and I'm using hot glue to attach all of these. I don't care so much that a little bit of glue seeps out at the bottom, because I know there will be a lot of grounding and basing that's going to hide all of that extra glue. I'm just putting my pieces on the base to mark their position, just so that I make sure I don't accidentally put basing materials under the houses, because that would make it a lot harder to attach them later, and also it would be a little bit of a waste of materials. So I applied a thick layer of PVA glue, and I'm putting on some tiny pebbles first, followed by some fine granite, and finally by some construction sand This combination forms a really interesting and varied ground texture that I quite like. And of course, different environments could require different qualities, but I thought this will work. I'm applying a thick layer of PVA glue in the spots where my main elements will be attached. And when the PVA glue dries, I know it's going to hold really well. And applying some extra construction sand all around to cover the naked areas. When I left this to dry overnight, and I also painted over the whole ground with a mixture of shellac ink and brown paint, and painted it with a little bit of color variation. Now I'm moving on to applying static grass to my base, and I make this thin down PVA glue mixture, and I'm going to use my homemade static grass applicator. Static grass stands on ends when electricity is applied to it because it's synthetic fibers and it will end up being dimensional. I'm just spritzing on some isopropyl alcohol so that the surface tension of the ground is reduced and it's absorbing the glue and water mixture a bit better. And now I'm going to be using my static grass applicator, just gently tapping the little basket with all the fibers falling out and standing up on their end, just like real grass would. And I'm doing small sections at a time. In the end, the back part of this will actually be covered, but I didn't know at the time of making this. And I leave some areas more sparse and others more dense. I can control it to some degree with how much I shake and how much grass I let fall out. And I did focus my grass application more in the front areas, but I still wanted to have sparser regions. I'm using a clean dry brush to get rid of some of the excess static grass that might be clinging to some of the objects. I pulled out the collection of plastic plants that I've collected over the years, and I'm just trying to envision which parts of these large things I can use at this scale as plants. And as you can see, I'm just cutting off bits and bobs that I like and that I think I may be able to use as miniature plants at this scale. And to make them work, I am disassembling, for example, this flower, and I'm going to be using the petals as succulent leaves at the end of my projects. So of course I need to paint them from that ugly plasticky purple to something more realistic. I'm taking my time trimming and cutting and shaping things with scissors to get rid of all the flashing and seams and ugly plasticky bits that they may be. And I'm using some nice quality acrylic paints to paint everything painstakingly. A lot of these actually get 2 or 3 coats, to hide that really shiny, ugly plasticiness. For example, these ones, they just get dabbed on with this acrylic paint, and it creates this dusty effect on the leaves, and it almost reminds me of specific real plant that I don't know what it's called. But it kind of has like this white fuzzy appearance, and that's what it reminded me of. I'm using a variety of greens, and everything gets painted a little bit different than the other, but this process did take some time, but it is a relaxing activity for me while I'm listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video. The ones that had the little tiny styrofoam balls, I wanted to make them into some sort of fruiting bodies, so I'm using a little bit of the same red that I used on the houses to just make the berries look like they are just about to go ripe. And yes, here I am painting the tiny purple petals with a dark green first to turn them into succulent leaves, and they definitely got a couple of coats. These were very stubborn and very shiny and a little bit hard to handle. I also have this kind of vine thing. It's actually just like some jute cord with some tiny leaves attached to it, and it's this natural color, and I painted it dark green, and then I shaded it with a lighter one. So here I am whittling down a coffee stirrer. I wanted to have these tiny pieces of wood, so I'm actually taking my time with the craft knife and whittling down these little pieces, because the coffee stirrer is like pine. It's this very white wood, and I wanted it to have a darkish reddish brown color instead. But I made the mistake of putting acrylic paint straight from the bottle on there, when a stain would have worked a lot better. And that's what I end up doing. I end up pulling all the pieces out and like dabbing them down with a piece of tissue. And I'm actually taking my time to burn the ends of these tiny things one by one, because these are going to make a tiny campfire. And I had the option of painstakingly painting the burnt wood effect on it, or actually taking fire to it, and this is so much easier, and it's also real. So to make my tiny campfire, I took some white marble pebbles for the campfire rocks. I don't know what they're called, and just attaching them carefully in a circle. And I'm adding the tiny little burnt sticks one by one, sort of stacking the campfire. I wanted to make a tiny garden rake, so I just used some regular toothpicks, and I'm cutting some sticks to length for the handle and the head, And I'm cutting off the teeny sharp points of the toothpicks to make the teeth of the rake. And there it is, me trying to put it together. And that's what it looks like after I painted it. Tiny rake. So I attached the vine on top of the fence thingies, and now I'm going to move on to adding all of my little elements. First of all, I need to fill the back here, and I thought it would be really nice if that area was a little bit raised, like there's a little bit of a hill back there. So I'm using these they're actually like aquarium decorations. They're basically styrofoam shapes that are coated in some sort of rubbery thing, and then with this grassy thing applied on the surface. But I think they work really well in like miniature terrain making. And I'm using this other plastic plant that was previously spray painted because it has such tiny leaves. I honestly didn't think I would have the patience to paint them by hand. And as with all plasticky things, if something is not painted, it's going to look like plastic. Unless you really want to have some really shiny plants, like I can imagine like some sort of tropical jungle plants. It was very hard to film because it's so tiny, but I made this little outdoor storage area, and that one got attached to the side of one of the houses. And I'm adding more of the foliage. I've also added some of the planters here and there, and I'm using just a little bit of dark green over those hills because that original green was a little bit too vibrant for my taste. And now to one of the best parts, applying grass tufts and little bushes and details here and there and everywhere, all over the little diorama. And here it is after all the plants and foliage and all the elements have been added. The only thing left to do at this stage is to put water in the fountain. And I'm going to be using Glossy Accents, which is a kind of air dry resin medium, and I'm just carefully filling in the fountain. This turns from milky white to completely transparent, as you can see. And here is my finished piece. All the three little houses have their own character. And there it is, with the glossy accents all dried. It looks like a slowly bubbling fountain. And I attached a little ladder, and there is my tiny rake and the campfire. And I added a tiny chair as if someone was toasting marshmallows just there before the rain came and put out the fire. And the static grass actually came out really nice. It's very soft and nice to pet. My storage area outside came out really well, and I'm very fond of these tiny resin bottles, especially that big yellow one that kind of looks like a gourd. And and the blue one just gives a little bit of a splash of color. I have these planters all over the place with more exotic plants than what grows in the environment. And this particular plant, I like to think that it's the seed from the roof flower, that really large one. And when it sprouted, the guardians didn't have the heart to pull it up. And now it's growing into a giant plant. And all the way back here, you can see all the wild foliage and vegetation. I just really like this crowded, whimsical, wild looking. And there you can see my fruity, berry-like plants. I think they came out really cute. Now you may be wondering what's up with that giant shell in the forest, but I think the guardians, just like everyone else, like to collect souvenirs, so I guess they just brought it home with them from the seaside. And here it is in the back. Outside of the fence I left it be gritty, and that's where my little succulents go. I kind of even like that some of the purple is coming through as an undertone, because succulents sometimes do have shades of like maroon and purple. I like the variety of vegetation, it makes it look more realistic. And there it is, my little environment is done. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I've attached some still pictures now at the end. Do let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I would love to hear your opinions, and any feedback is really welcome. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a nice day. Bye.